when it comes to music, just like language, you have to have a structure. You have to have some kind of a set of parameters that allows you to build expressions.
Almost 18 years ago to this day, I was walking down the street in an area of Los Angeles, California called Larchmont. This was an area I used to hang out in all the time. I used to go there to cafes and write. I used to do yoga there. But on this particular day, I wasn't walking in a positive mood because I was about to go to a payphone. There were no cell phones, at least for me at that time. And I called back to Europe to ask my mother to book me a ticket out of Los Angeles because I had no money left. I had no gigs in sight and I couldn't pay my rent. So I had no other option other than to leave. But later that evening, things were about to radically change. I'm Eshan Kadaru, aka Push for Life, and welcome to episode number 5 of Music, Sounds, and Silence, featuring the sonic wizard, Mike DiMattia. First off, I'd like to thank everyone for all of the positive feedback I've received so far for the podcast. I have to say I'm extremely happy that those first 4 episodes are over. For those of you who may not have heard the first 4 episodes, they are all monologues, and I have to say it's not something I particularly enjoyed doing, but I did want to have them there for context for those of you who want to know where it is I'm coming from regarding this podcast. Alright, so let's get back to the story in Los Angeles. So like I said, I needed to get bailed out of Los Angeles as soon as possible because I had no money left, I couldn't pay my rent, I had no gigs in sight, so there was just no way I could stay there even one day longer. But that evening I went home and met up with a friend who I'd met just a few days before, and it turned out he wanted to start a band, and I told him that I was a drummer looking for a gig, and he had thought that I could play in his band. So he basically offered to put me up in his apartment, feed me 3 meals a day, and in exchange, I would play drums in his band. Now, my only other option was to go back to Europe and have nothing there, so I was over the moon, and I basically said, I'm in. Later that week, I ended up moving into his apartment. He was actually living in his girlfriend's apartment at the time, so that way I got his room. He had another roommate, but it was just basically me and his roommate in this apartment, and I was ready to go again. I was back on my feet, so to speak. And during the next 6 months, he ended up putting together this band. So his vision was to be the singer of this band. Now, truth be told, he really wasn't the greatest singer in the world, but one of his superpowers was he had this uncanny ability to attract extremely interesting and creative people into his life. And one day he brought in this keyboardist to rehearsal who'd only been in Los Angeles for a few months. We hit it off instantly and have been friends ever since. That young keyboardist was my guest today, Mike DiMattia. Now, ever since I moved from Los Angeles back to Europe in 2001, Mike and I have only seen each other a handful of times, but every time we see each other, we always have extremely deep and interesting conversations. So I'm extremely happy to have Mike on as my very first guest on Music, Sounds, and Silence. And with that said, let's just jump right into the podcast. Sit back and relax and welcome Boston-based sonic wizard Michael DiMattia. Alright, so Mike DiMattia. Alright, if you, just for the audience who's listening, how would you describe yourself? Like where you're at right now in your life, professionally and or personally?
Oh, that's a good opening. Yeah, right now, professionally, well, let me go the personal one because that's easy. Right now, I'm a dad with a 4-year-old that's about to turn 5. So, you know, my life kind of revolves around the family unit at this point. You know, my wife and I spent a lot of time in LA. That's where we met Ish, obviously. There's the connection there. So we did that whole thing and we're very career oriented at that point. So moving back to the New England area, I'm now in the suburbs of Boston, and that whole transition into the family life kind of put my profession as more of a not as much of a driving factor. At this point, though, career-wise, it's been tough. Like recently, the industry, in terms of budgets and the type of work that I'm used to doing, has become harder to come by, all across the gamut, too, for a lot of people.
Could you just maybe describe what type of work you've done so far?
Yeah, so I do, anything I can get my hands on that is digital audio related. But a lot of my work has been in composition and working on film, music, TV show music, video games, anything that kind of comes my way. I got to start in LA. I went to Berkeley College of Music and moved out to Los Angeles and was hoping to just kind of, get my foot in the door. And that's was in 2000. So at that time, everything was wide open and there was tons of money and there was a huge spectrum of budgeted projects. Everything, there was A-list, but there was also B-list and even kind of a C-list. And nowadays all of that's kind of gone.
Right.
And part of it is due to technology evolving. There's it's a bittersweet thing because we have a lot of new frontiers, new formats happening, that ways of sharing information, ways of creating art, ways of sharing that art that we didn't have before.
Yeah.
But it has definitely affected the industry. And at the time that I moved out to LA, I was trying to get film scoring. I got really lucky. I fell into a position with BT, who is a composer and electronic artist and DJ. And at the time, it was just, he was getting movie scores, he was making albums, and I just kind of slipped right in as a intern at first, and it turned into a position. And that kind of got me started in that avenue of really working really hard, working many hours, high stress situations, just to, move up in the ranks. And
what would you say was your role when you started working with BT? What exactly were you doing?
Well, at first I was literally a studio assistant.
Yeah.
And not necessarily, I would actually, I started getting coffee. But he actually also had a personal assistant. So I got to do a lot more hands-on. I mean, the first day that I showed up to his house, it was like he handed me a MIDI cable and told me to crawl into the back of his rig and plug the synth in. So I was like, all right. And I crawled back there, plugged it in. And then he handed me a credit card. He's like, you need a computer?
Oh, wow.
and sent me to the Mac store to buy a computer. And I was like, all right, this is crazy, interesting. I didn't expect it. It was 6 months of searching for a gig. So we got to LA and I just couldn't find anything for a while. And this was one of those just super by chance. He picked me out of hundreds of candidates, and it just, it was only supposed to be for a month.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was supposed to be for a month, and then he offered me a year, and then after that, he offered me a 3-year contract.
Wow.
So, and I think I spent 5 solid years killing myself. And honestly, I burnt out towards the end of that. I'm going to be completely honest during, yeah. And to one of your earlier podcasts when you're talking about how difficult it can be especially for people that are submerged in trying to make money doing art, and having it as a business, as a driving force, can burn you out on a lot of the aspects of why you got into it in the first place.
You said you studied in Berkeley. Could you just quickly elaborate on what your focus was at Berkeley? Yeah.
At Berkeley, I knew I wanted to do music, and I knew Berkeley was the place to go. I lived right outside of Boston, so I didn't have to travel very far from home.
Right.
And when I got there, though, I didn't know what I was going to major in. I had no idea. So freshman year, just like most of the freshmen, and anybody that knows somebody that's gone to Berkeley can probably tell you, it might have changed since then, but the freshman class is half the school, because between freshman and sophomore year, half of the class drops out.
Oh, really?
And the senior class is actually quite small compared
Is that
to the
because
entering.
it's so tough, or just people end up deciding to do other things?
Some people realize, oh wait, this might not be for me, or a big portion also go there for something specific.
Right.
And they take the courses that they need, they get the hands-on experience they need, and they go right out right away. I knew some freshman cats that went to a couple classes and found a gig and then just dropped out because they were like, okay, well, the whole point of coming to college is to get a job.
Yeah, very true.
So, and it was pretty funny. In the year before I graduated, David Bowie did the commencement speech.
Wow.
And he did this whole speech about how the graduating class, he's like, you guys are the real music makers. He's like, because he's like, me, I'm just a rock and roll star, And he went on and he was like, no, and everybody laughed, but he's like, no, I'm serious. He's like, I became a rock and roll star. Like, my music, it's not incredibly complicated. And he went into this whole thing, how he wouldn't have a career if it wasn't for people that were trained, that knew how to record them properly, help them with the parts, put the bands together, go on tour. There's so much in it. There's so many jobs to be had. When I went to Berkeley, I had no idea what I was going to do. And then, so my sophomore year, I picked my major to be film scoring specifically. And I didn't know how I would take to that, but what I liked about it was well-rounded.
Right.
So I could compose, and I could orchestrate, and I could learn how to conduct. And a lot of the classes, you just watch movies. I was like, this is
that's
sweet.
cool.
I'm just gonna watch
That's
movies.
like the best classes in school when we used to go and the teacher would be like, let's watch a movie. And everyone was like, yeah.
Dude, and what was so cool is we had this really special viewing room that had surround sound, and they had back then they were rocking a laser disc player. DVD player was like, oh my gosh, we're just getting this DVD player thing, but they had all sorts of different formats, old school analog tape, reel to reel. Wow. So we would watch movies in 24 millimeter.
That's cool.
It was really dope. And
did they have a popcorn machine?
Yeah, I wish, but the seats were like a theater, and
really,
there's the desk part kind of slid out from the arm,
nice,
and folded over your lap, and then you throw your books on there. And I swear, there were times where we went to class. It was a 2-hour class. We went to class, and there'd be a DVD sitting on the desk, and with a note from the teacher, "Watch this." And we'll talk about it next class.
So cool.
And we'd all look at each other just like, okay, pop it in and kick back. So it was awesome, though. I ended up loving film scoring. And I was like, you know what? How do I get into this? And they said, you have to move to either Los Angeles, London, India, or New York City.
What year was this roughly, just for the audience?
This was 1998, 99. I was in the film score department, and then I graduated 2000. So it was the 90s, and I mean late 90s. And digital audio was just starting to become a thing. When I was in school, they taught us to cut tape. So
wow, that's great.
Yeah, so, I mean, and the teacher even told us. I mean, basically, I was in school during the Napster, the entire Napster, and when that happened, every Berkeley student was required to take a semester of music business. Mm-hmm. And our teacher came out and said, what I'm going to teach you is probably antiquated because we're entering a digital world and the laws are wide open right now and everything's going to change.
Wow.
And I rode that cusp. Going into LA, it was already changing. So, I mean, when I got to BT's, we were working with 1/4-inch tape to sync with.
Really?
We were not using QuickTime files.
Wow.
There was, at that point in time, being a courier was it was interesting. It was almost like being a valet.
Right.
These couriers would make so much money.
What's a courier? I haven't actually heard that word.
Like a personal, or not a personal, but a hired courier service.
Oh, I see what you mean. Right. You mean for the tapes and stuff? Like people who would drive stuff around?
They literally would.
Yeah.
We knew the guy. He would show up every day with new tapes of whatever movie we were working on and take the old ones, or actually sometimes just leave them. We'd have a room full of tapes. They'd have to come in with a truck. When I say a room full of tapes, I mean just like hundreds of tapes by the end of a project. And then all that went away. Eventually, when digital video came out, it was just like, okay, we don't have to have tapes. We don't have to have couriers. It's like right away, a bunch of people didn't have jobs.
Yeah.
Like that was the first big change, this switch over from analog to digital.
Yep.
And the use of samples, which wasn't done when I was going to college. We didn't, there weren't sample libraries and the computers were not fast enough to really use that technology to create music. But yeah, no, so it's a really, I feel very fortunate to be, and you're the same generation. It's like you've seen the whole evolution.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually just also for the audience, that's where we actually met, was when you just started working with BT back in 2000.
Mm-hmm. Yep, through Carlos, his assistant Carlos, met your roommate.
Yep,
yeah,
crazy roommate.
Great, yeah. That's a whole podcast unto itself.
Yeah, maybe one day I'll find him again, and I'll have to have him on the podcast.
Oh, that would be so cool.
Unfortunately, he kept changing his name, so there's no way I think I'll ever find him again. But if you're listening, contact me.
You know who you are.
You know who you are. Anyway, just to move on a little, would you always consider yourself an artistic person? Like, is that something that has, as long as you can remember, been part of your life?
Yeah, to kind of double back prior to kind of going to college and trying to make music a career, wanting to go into music as a career stems directly from my passion for music, and not from the aspect of wanting to make tons of money, because everybody knows it's hard to make money doing music. But as a child, I was exposed to a lot of music. It's interesting because my father's a doctor. However, he's a piano player. So my mother did not play piano, but she loved music. She loves piano. And her mother, my grandmother, played piano very well.
Oh, really? I
didn't know that. I had piano players on both sides of my family. Every night my dad would sit in front of the piano and play some stuff.
What kind of stuff was he playing?
Oh, he liked a lot of the rock standards, like 1950s, 1960s. He loved to play the Beatles.
Cool.
He took piano lessons, obviously, growing up. My grandmother on that side of the family forced them to take piano lessons, and my parents basically forced the three of us. I have an older brother and younger sister. We all took piano lessons. Out of the three of us, I was the only one that they said, you take piano until high school, and then if you want to keep going, keep going. If you don't, you can stop.
Okay.
So they gave us a choice. They're like, you're going to do it, but I'm going to give you a choice to keep going.
Okay, so when would you say that you really knew you wanted to do music, like full-time professionally? What happened there?
Basically, I got into my first instrument was piano.
Yeah.
And that was per my parents' instruction, but I took to it and I liked practice. I liked playing it, and I was making music right away. And I got into very quickly as I grew up and as the technology was available, synthesizers were the next progression. I got a guitar, saxophone.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was introduced to brass instruments in the 5th grade. They wanted to do like a jazz band program, and it normally started in the 6th grade in our district, but they decided to try it in the 5th grade, and you could pick trumpet, saxophone, flute, clarinet, and you didn't have to keep the instrument you picked, but if you were enrolled in this course, you had to pick one and then see if you liked it, and I picked alto sax. Wow. And we had a jazz band. So starting the 5th grade all the way up to high school, and then through high school, I was in the jazz band.
Really? I never knew that.
Yeah, man. So I played saxophone. I'm like an alto saxophone. I was the first chair alto sax straight through high school.
Do you still play?
I have not played pretty much since I graduated from high school.
Sorry, you were about to say something. I just interrupted you. Sorry.
No, it's cool. No, I pick it up from time to time. No, but you know what's really funny about that is when I went to high school, is when I really started getting into composition, and I knew I wanted to go to Berkeley, and I was like, okay, you know what? Piano is my instrument. That's my strongest instrument. That's the one I started on. I'm classically trained in piano, by the way. Right. So that's an important part of my history. There are some that are jazz trained, but I was very much classically trained, and so my roots are classical. In film scoring, very much you study the classical styles.
Right.
So jazz, I'm a little shaky on jazz.
Okay.
Not blues or, not contemporary jazz, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Hardcore.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, I wanted to play jazz piano in the jazz band. And they did not have a strong alto saxophone for their first chair. And so literally the jazz instructor, the guy that ran the jazz band was like, I'm never letting you play piano. He's like, first off, we don't have microphones to mic the piano, so nobody is going to hear you on recitals. And he's like, second of all, I need a saxophonist. So for 3 years, I put up with that. And my senior year, I was like, put me in the front of the piano or I quit. And finally, he put me in front of the piano. He's like, oh, okay, you want to play some jazz piano? And that was hard. That class turned it from being like my easy class to my hardest class by becoming the jazz pianist. And he was right. Nobody could hear you in the recital.
So this would actually interest me, just to go off on a little tangent here. Because there's a definite sort of rift between classically trained musicians, meaning classical music, and then jazz musicians, right? It's almost like two different paradigms of how to approach music, right? So how did it feel going from the classical pianist to being the jazz pianist? What was the internal shift that had to take place?
I honestly just didn't listen to enough jazz growing up. I listened to a lot of classical music. I listened to a lot of rock and blues.
Right.
But that's like the closest I came to jazz was like out there blues, but I didn't get into the really hardcore jazz. So feeling it was difficult. But we weren't playing anything that difficult.
Yeah.
We were playing pretty standard, high school level pieces. And but the piano parts were fairly involved in terms of voice leading.
Yeah.
And for those listening that don't know what that musical term means, it's how the notes in a chord can be arranged so that your fingers move the shortest distance between notes in properly voice-led ensemble music. Your fingers don't move too much, so you can hit a wide range of chords
just by like slightly shifting your fingers.
And that lends as well to, in classical music, counterpoint. In jazz, they blow out a lot of the rules that you don't see in classical music. So my mind had to formulate new pathways when I was looking at these jazz scores. I can honestly say, because it was like, oh, I understand this from rock, but all these like 13ths and flat nines and you're not playing the root, which I was not used to doing. And I struggled with that through Berkeley. I'll be totally honest. We had a performance course called comping, which was all about just like they give you a sheet music with a bunch of chords on it, and you have to invent your own voice leading, and they would do it on the fly. Like you'd have tests where you have to sight read, and there's nothing to prepare for, because you walk in and they just hand you something that you've never seen before, and they're like, do this, and then change the voice leading, do it up a major third, transpose it on the spot. That was just my nightmare. So I'm not performance minded in that sense. But if you give me that sheet music and you ask me to do an arrangement, I could sit down with pencil and paper in front of a piano, and that became my forte, which is why I think I gravitated towards composition.
Why would you say that you feel so drawn to expressing yourself through music? Because, as an artist, there are so many different avenues you can express yourself through. But what was it that you would say drew you to music in the first place?
Well, I think I can actually say with certainty from my childhood memories that as a child I found it incredibly fascinating that I could write my own music, because I heard these, I would hear my dad play music and this, and he would always tell me about the composer or the artist that wrote it, and play records, before CDs came out, obviously as well. I mean, that was our generation. It was like we had tape deck and a record player, and it was all about the records.
Yeah.
Then I sat down at the piano and I was like, wait, I can just plunk away at this and create something. And I remember the first time I wrote a piece of music, and I never wrote it down. I don't really even remember how to play it. I think my parents might have an audio recording of it somewhere, but that blew me away. I was like, wait a minute, I just expressed something. I said something through these notes that no one else has said.
Right. And
then that was, to me, it's like, okay, I can express new things through this medium. And it's surprising when I think back on it and I look at my own son. I'm surprised at how young of an age I figured that out.
How old do you think you were, if you remember?
I was probably like 5.
Oh,
5
really?
or 6.
Wow.
5 or 6, where I started plunking away at the piano because at that point in time, my dad had sat me on his lap numerous occasions and held my finger, my forefinger, and just plunk out melodies as he played the left hand. I was used to the piano at my earliest memories. Like, I don't, I'm sure there's times he put me on his lap that I don't even remember. And when I got older and I sat at the piano, it was very familiar.
Right.
Like, when I got older, when I was like 6, like 6, 7,
1 or 2 years later.
Yeah. No, which is like 5 years later, I sit at the piano and I'm like, whoa. I sat on my dad's lap at 1 year old. I don't even remember that probably at all, but it made an impact on me. And I guess there's that. It's interesting. This podcast is actually making me think of that in a different way, because I never thought of the connection. There's paternal father son, parent son connection there.
Yeah,
that fueled the basis of my piano playing.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, I never really thought of it that way, but that's true.
And you'd mentioned that one of the things that fascinated you was that you could express yourself through the medium of the piano and composition in ways that people hadn't expressed themselves yet, right? One of the topics that has just been very interesting to me as a musician for as long as I can remember is I've always wondered what the humans need for self-expression is, because as human beings, self-expression is really one of the biggest things that make us human in a way. And it's not even just like music or art, even, the way we talk, the inflection we have when we speak, the way we dress, the way we do our hair. There's so many different ways to express yourself. And in a way, I'd say for the majority of the human race, it's something that's very important to find a way to express yourself that you feel like you are being yourself, right? And do you have any thoughts on that? On just the basic need for humans to express themselves, like where that comes from, what it means? Do you have any ideas on that?
Definitely. First off, you're talking about the identity of self, which is something that every personality, and that every human being that is cognizant and conscious and sentient and aware of their surroundings and aware of their origins and their destiny, want to identify as something specific. At the same time, they want to be connected to the whole. So there is the part and there's the whole. There's the identity of the individual, which is incredibly unique and non-repeatable, or not. There's people that are similar, but nobody's the same.
Even like twins, right? Who are genetically almost the same.
So true. Yeah, where they could literally share organs with each other, no problem. It's like they are so genetically the same, materially speaking, biologically speaking, but personality-wise, they can be very, very different with very different interests, very different perspectives and perceptions. The idea that there is this very individualistic personality, that personalities are unique and personality traits are unique. It says a lot about what's really going on in terms of evolution. I mean, that's another topic. I don't want to go too off on a tangent, but in terms of how evolution progresses, and how these complexities interact. And so, when we talk about people that want to express themselves via art, via language, I mean, language is obviously the first easiest building bridge in connecting with people. And of course, even children at a very young age. I didn't know this growing up. When we were growing up, I had never heard of this baby sign language, and then we taught our son baby sign language.
Oh, yeah?
And before he could formulate words, he was signing.
Oh, wow.
Simple things like "I'm hungry," "I want more," "I'm all done," things like that, where he couldn't say the words, but he knew the concepts enough to move his hands.
And he could communicate, just not verbally.
Yeah, just not verbally. And the baby sign, I first saw it, BT did this with his daughter.
Right.
He did the baby sign language, and I was like, wow, it was so amazing how quick, it's like she can't talk yet, but she can totally have a conversation. And I did it with my son, and it was the same kind of thing. Even when he could start saying the words, he still did the hand signals for a while, and then finally he finally dropped the hand signals.
Yeah.
This want to connect, it's a survival need, obviously, as well. I mean, you need to be able to communicate with others in terms of growth in general. But this desire to be part of the pack, which I think is very DNA infused, evolutionary. It's a survival mechanism to be part of the pack and to be a member, to be part of something.
Yeah.
And I think that as animals have progressed, again, this is probably like a whole other podcast. We could get so deep into this topic. But I feel like as humans have progressed in complexity of thought and complexity of mind and the complexities of civilization in general, of society in general, as that has gone on, we've found new and more complex ways to express ourselves. And I feel that music, art in general, even language obviously is a incredible medium, especially like poetry and the way, look at some of the great authors, the way they tell stories, some of the great poets.
Yeah, totally.
How to create phrases that bring forth emotions that,
and paint pictures, right? Like,
oh yeah, pictures, stories of who we are, mm-hmm. Stories of what we could be, stories of the human condition. I mean, when I was in high school, I was huge into literature, and I absolutely loved English class just for that. And I had some really cool English teachers. I definitely would attribute some of my love for literature to my high school teachers. So teachers out there, you make a good impression on your students because they'll take that stuff. I mean, I had some great teachers. And read some really intense, powerful stories of all different kinds of we did the traditional stuff, but I'll never forget Kafka's one of my favorites.
Oh, yeah? That
Kafka's work is insane. But this, express yourself through language, through music, through art, through, dance. I mean, you've done so much more performance, and you know how incredible these just abstract expressions and people don't know how to take them in. It's like you've heard words enough, and so when somebody says a sentence to you, it's familiar, but there are experiences that you can express through music, I believe, that are incredibly unique. And the person listening sometimes is just blown away. They have nothing they have no context for what.
Yeah, no reference point. Yeah.
Yeah, and those type of experiences are very groundbreaking.
Yeah.
And that gets into the sort of the spiritual realm of music, in my opinion, when you are exploring okay, I know how to say a sentence. It's like, you look at animal evolution. It's the same way. It's, here's this tool. Well, we've gone from smacking stuff with bones to computers, and our expression should follow suit. I mean, maybe it hasn't progressed as much as our technology, but I think art has expanded quite a bit as we've gone. And I'm incredibly excited to see where it's going to go with this technological boom that is honestly pretty new to us.
How would you say, just in the period of your professional career, so say starting around 2000 working with BT, up until now, that's like 17 years, which really isn't that long. What are your observations on how technology not only has changed but how it has influenced music making and even the perception of listening to music. What are your thoughts on that?
One of the first and most glaring differences, when I was at Berkeley, we did most of our composition via staff paper with a pencil, and you sat in front of a piano and you did it.
Like the way they were doing it like hundreds of years ago, literally.
I could give you a great comparison. It's like the difference between, back in the day when you had to write a paper for school and you hand wrote it, and there was like maybe one kid in the class that typed it. Right. on a typewriter.
Yeah.
And then word processing came, and more of the kids in the class were handing in word processed documents, but they were kind of the suck ups. It was not expected. Most students still hand wrote their papers. And then one day it was like, you have to type it. Nobody could hand it. I don't know how it was where you grew up, but that was the progression. I watched that progression. By the time I got to high school, it was like double space, they had formatting rules. The same kind of thing happened with music. And it's like you're on staff paper, paper and a pencil, and you're in front of your instrument. If you're a vocalist, if you're a guitarist, if you're a guitarist, you're with your guitar, whatever, and you're figuring this stuff out. You're thinking about it, and especially if you're writing for orchestra or you're writing for an ensemble, you're imagining it in your head.
Right.
And you pray to God you get the chance to hear that done by an actual ensemble.
Right.
When you're a student, you're writing a lot of conceptual pieces that never get played by anybody.
Right. Never thought of it like that.
But I mean, at the time, in our orchestration class, our teacher kind of hit us with like that rude awakening. He was just like, only 1%. I can't remember the figure. I am making this figure up right now, but it is something this extreme. It's like 1% of all orchestrators and composers will actually get, or less than 1%, will actually get to hear their music performed by a large orchestra.
Whoa.
It's something even probably smaller than that.
Yeah, I'm sure. Especially these days.
Yeah, how many orchestras are there that will take the time to learn your piece, and you have to create a master score and parts for everybody and
just like, the amount of money that you need to finance it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. To get the spot and you got a conductor, you got 60 players, 70 players, 80 players,
and if you're recording it in a studio, you know what I mean, like
or a live performance. I mean, you'd hope to get it played in front of people, but if you're going into a studio, that I think in LA, union rates, and this was back in 2000, the union rates, it would be like $30,000 to $50,000 per minute.
Oh my God! I thought you were going to say for the session.
No, per minute of recorded music.
Oh my God!
So, like, if you recorded 10 minutes,
whoa,
you're looking at $300,000, $500,000.
Whoa.
You could look up the rates probably, but a lot of the big studios have closed. But back in the day, so pencil and paper, and you're thinking about this stuff, and they're explaining, back in the day, Bach would sit in the coffee house, or Mozart, or whoever would sit and just literally bang out quartet music without even a piano. They would just sit there and write on staff paper like they could hear it in their heads. That's true musical
genius. Yeah.
I can't even comprehend that.
Yeah, especially the type of music they were creating.
Oh, and I went through classes at Berkeley where it's like your big assignment for this week is to write a fugue, and you have to follow the rules. And like if you got a bad score on that, the teacher reminds you that if you had written that for the king back in the day, they would chop your head off.
Whoa.
Because that was how things went. There's no tritones. Like
right.
Jimi Hendrix would be totally screwed if they handed him guitar and told him to go play in front of the king in like the Renaissance or whatever.
Yeah.
Or no, I can't remember the period. Baroque, which I am horrible with music history too.
Oh, me too.
I got to brush up. They crammed so much of that down my throat at Berkeley that like after I graduated, I'm like, get rid of these history books. I want to move forward with my life. So it went from that to MIDI. Uh-huh. And just like back, like my comparison of a kid writing a paper versus typing it, you had some students, and I was one of those that was sort of a dork that had music notation software.
Mm-hmm.
So I would sometimes print out my sheet music. but I didn't have a MIDI setup to play it into a computer until like my junior or senior year. So like I had a 4-track, but we weren't doing MIDI files. We didn't have computers. It's like the average Berkeley student when I was at Berkeley did not have a computer.
Okay.
Only like 1 out of every 10 rooms had a computer.
Yeah, I mean, this is a long time ago. I mean, it's like 20 years ago almost.
Everybody had like a synth of some kind in their room, and everybody had a guitar. Some people had their drum set up there. Everybody had a 4-track, but nobody had computers, and people weren't recording digitally on computers. And every homework assignment I did when I was at Berkeley, and this is weird because I literally was on the cusp. I was right on the edge of this being some of the last generations that had to do this.
Right.
But all the projects I handed in were on tape. Were on cassette tapes.
Really?
When I was receiving projects from classes, like they'd be like, your homework assignment is to listen to this, and they would hand out cassette tapes, not even CDs.
That's so weird.
Like burning a CD wasn't like a thing yet.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That's true.
It wasn't. It was like the film scoring department had one CD burner, and it was this coveted thing.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, I burned my thing on a CD, and everybody would just be like, are you serious? How did you get access to the CD burner?
Yeah.
Dude, it took like 8 hours, but I got this. Yeah. And I remember even when I started working with BT, he had a CD burner that burned real time. You'd hit record. One person would stand at the CD player, and the other person would stand at the computer to hit the space bar.
All right, to play it.
And we were in like Logic 3 or something.
Yeah.
You'd hit play, and it would go through the mixing board, come with whatever external. It was like everything was external outboard effects, which people got to get back to, and I think it's kind of making a resurgence.
Yeah,
people are starting this whole idea of everything in the computer versus having some outboard gear. But it would go through everything and go to the CD player, and the person on the other end would have to hit the button, and you'd like count down 3, 2, 1, and you'd hit the button. And it burned real time. And it's like kids nowadays. Okay, so to go back to the whole transition to MIDI, then you're creating scores via digital and printing them out, and finally having access to MIDI, and then the DAWs, the development of digital audio workspace,
workstations, right?
Workstations, workstations. Basically became the next upcoming thing.
Right.
And I remember, again, at Berkeley, the only 2 programs they taught were Digital Performer, and we did some MIDI stuff, but the samples were so atrocious. There were no sample libraries with great samples, so it was like you mocked up for the purpose of the players, and everything had to be written out, and all of my projects had to be recorded with live musicians who are also students. And they had this thing with the performance majors that they would get credits for being on a film scoring majors session. So it was awesome. It was like this ideal. You went through Berkeley thinking that life was perfect because you had like access to some of the most amazing musicians, all this awesome technology, and you were being handed projects.
And everyone was motivated to do it.
And everyone's And then you get the real world, and it's like you're struggling to find projects. But it was interesting to watch. And then while I was at BT's, I learned DAW. I got way more into Logic. I started on Logic in Berkeley, but it really was like my senior year I started getting into that. And Acid was the other big program that I got into. Yeah.
Is that even around anymore? I don't even think it...
No, it is. It's totally still around. Yeah. Wow. Cubase, which is another conversation that is one of the most powerful pieces of software out there. I'm about to make the leap from Logic to Cubase.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, Apple. I'm terribly sorry. You guys got to just take a look at Cubase. That's all I'm going to say about that.
They have to get their shit together, man, Apple.
That
is a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, oh, God. There's some stuff going on there. I just don't understand.
But yeah, back to the evolution of what you were saying with...
Yeah, so then DAWs it became all digital. And the price of a computer and the amount of power you had became more compact, being able to share files. So while I was this is really interesting. When I was at BT's working throughout the first years, 2001, 2002, we started working on a movie with Rob Cohen called Stealth. And during those days, it got to the point where we had enough technology where we could author a DVD of cues that we wrote against pictures. So until then, every time you needed to show the director something, you had to get in the same room.
Right.
Which I prefer. Honestly, at this point in time, having experienced the other way for much longer, most of my career, you have not had to be in the same room with the producers or the director when they're watching and listening to what you did. So you can't discuss it with them.
Right.
It's just they listen to it and then that's it.
And you probably can't even vibe off of just body language and stuff, right?
Right. Yeah. And you can't ride, like back in the day, you'd ride the volume and you would mute things, be like, look here's the drum part, and then here's this part, and then this is how they go together, and you'd be able to explain your reasoning. And then it became like this, just hand it in, and they're in another room. So until then, it was like the director came over, the producers came over, you played it for them. Then we hit this leap where it's like, hey, we can author DVD in surround and send it via courier. Back to the couriers. The couriers aren't out of the equation yet, but send it same day via courier. So you call up your courier service. They show up an hour later. You hand them the DVD of like 3 cues that you did to picture. They courier it over to the director's house, and the director pops it in their incredible home theater system with projector and surround sound, and they watch it. And was like a huge, we were like, wow, this is great, and then we don't have to have these lengthy meetings, and we didn't really, though, understand the pitfalls of where that was going.
Right.
Because then the next thing we knew, it was all done via internet.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, people are listening and watching your music on a phone with headphones, or they're literally on an iPad playing it out loud with people talking in the background. And this has been, I'm sure, Ish, you've seen this joke floating around the internet, but it's like, goes through a list of expenses of a studio. It's like, $5,000 microphone, $20 cable, $200,000 mixing console, and da-da-da-da-da-da, and goes through all this. And then it's like 99-cent MP3.
Right, yeah.
$3.99 earbuds, Apple iPhone earbuds.
Yeah. It's so true, though. I mean,
that's where we've come, and it's like you're hoping. I mean, at least back when I first got to LA, everybody had. I mean, people still do. Obviously, the most kicking sound system is in their car, and it was a standard that you would take whatever music you were working on and listen to it in the car, where you listen to all your music so you can compare it to your favorite music. You know how things sound in your car, and it would be a great place to listen to it. And you knew that the director, whoever you were sending it to, a producer or whatever you were doing, would listen to it in their car. But yeah, no, it really did this radical progression. And I got to be honest, listening to a CD in a car is a different experience than listening to an MP3.
Yeah.
And now people literally have their phones, and they're streaming off of YouTube, or they're streaming off of iTunes. It's not even physically on their phone. They're doing it via the internet and listening to music. I feel a little bad for I'm trying to show my son, and he's already just doesn't care. But I'm trying to show, like, this is a stereo. These are speakers. This is full range. Feel the bass in your body. And luckily, the club scene is still obviously, it's actually made the club scene better because people aren't used to experiencing the vibrations of music anymore. I mean, when I was growing up, I had a giant stereo. My dad had a big stereo.
Yeah, it was the standard, really. If you could afford it, that was the first thing you would buy.
Yeah, and there wasn't a sub. It was just 2 speakers, but they had, usually the woofers were fairly decent size.
Yeah, like a hi-fi unit.
Yeah, 15-inch, 21-inch, whatever.
Yeah.
And and you had amazing sound. So it's interesting. It's weird that technology progresses like that.
Yeah.
But there are things about it that get pulled back, like the quality of an MP3.
Yeah. It's weird. It's like a double-edged sword, really. It's not necessarily always to the benefit of the arts, at least. Or
you know what? This actually segues into the idea of the medium that you're working in. For instance, the podcast. Like right now, we're doing a podcast, so it's audio-based, words. People can listen to this. Versus, video-based. Versus we put on a musical to express our ideas.
The musical podcast where we're just singing.
Yeah. And the technology. Anyways, yeah, no. So again, I'm really interested to where this is going.
Yeah. Right.
Because even as I sit here now, I feel that this is, even just the past couple of years, it's moving even more rapidly.
Yeah, it's the whole exponential curve, right? I mean, who knows where it's going to be in even just a year or two? Things change so quickly.
Very quick. Even just software. Another fascinating point to bring up, regarding this topic of where we've come from. I never thought of myself as a computer guy. I was into music. We had a computer growing up. The first computer we got was an Atari 800.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got an Apple IIc, which was with the monochrome matrix style monitor.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually our first IBM PS2, and those listening that are young know not PS2 as in PlayStation, but personal system 2 that had like a 10 megabyte hard drive in it or something. We got like 100 megabyte hard drive, and it was the bomb. It was like 100 megabytes. We'll never fill this thing up.
Yeah, with Word documents. That's going to be like thousands of books worth of space.
And video game was like on a 3.5, like 1 megabyte floppy disk.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got oh man, I got to send you a picture of it. I took it apart in the very room I'm in doing this podcast right now. There's a floppy disk nailed to the wall.
Oh, nice.
From the 90s too. I nailed
You'll
it
have
there.
to send it to me and I'll put it in the show notes.
Oh yeah, it's pretty classic. Yeah, no, so I was never like a computer guy at all. And I learned a little bit of computing, and I was like, that's cool. But when it came to music, I sat in front of the piano. I sat with my guitar. I sat with a 4-track was my big technology.
Right.
And we had a synth, a Super Roland JX10. Mm-hmm. And that also, with self-tuning oscillators. So it wasn't like an analog synth where you had to tune, it wasn't that old school. But it was pretty, for the time, it was like the modern thing. And little by little, I realized, oh gosh, this is going to computers. And by the time I got to Los Angeles, it was, you record onto hard drives. And at the time, everybody had like removable hard drive chassis, and the drives still weren't that big. No, there was no such thing as a terabyte. Like, to think a terabyte of information was like, that was just ridiculous to think.
Yeah, it still blows my mind, to be honest. Like gigabyte is where my mind still sort of like, that's the biggest thing that feels natural. Terabytes is just like supernatural still in my head.
You want to hear something that's just ridiculous?
Oh, go on.
Is I have on my computer right now, I'm talking through, is it's got a 500 gig SSD drive as the start drive, but alongside that, I've got 4 terabyte drives.
So 16 terabytes?
I got 16 terabytes.
Oh my God.
And it's like, it's really crazy. And
talk about exponential growth.
I'm like, what is half this crap? I mean, some of the projects I work on generate just ridiculous amounts of audio, and also to the size of the QuickTimes and different movies and whatever.
Yeah.
But what the kicker is this is the second time I've filled this thing with hard drives. So I have like another 16 terabytes that are just like full of.
Whoa.
Most of it's just cataloged materials from.
Still, that's just ridiculous.
But yeah, it's ridiculous. But when you start looking at what it is, there's lots of redundant backups and stuff.
Yeah, but it's just that you can even fill it. You know what I mean?
It's crazy. And then, I always look over at my little floppy disk hanging from the wall. Remember where we came from.
Yeah, totally. So we've been talking about music all this time, and the podcast itself is called Music, Sounds, and Silence, right? So
Right.
The thing I'm trying to get at really with this podcast is what music is, right? That's like, it's so ubiquitous in humanity. There's music everywhere in every culture, and a life without music would just be a rotten life as far as I'm concerned, So how do you feel that those three things relate to each other? Music, sound, and silence. There's sound, but sound at some point becomes music, and without silence, there would be no music to actually exist in. So what are your observations on those three things?
Oh, yeah, that is an amazing and deep question. To answer that, we kind of have to go back to the language perspective and this idea of wanting to connect and wanting to be part of the whole and what that means. Why do we have this urge to connect? So as it relates to sound, when sound becomes music, which is subjective in a way, but I think can be answered through the concept of music as being language. There's a quote that, music is the language of the cosmos. It is the language of angels. When I talk about music in that perspective, it's more than just audio. Music is vibration. I guess this gets into a little bit more specifics in terms of biology. Okay, so we are humans, and part of our sensory perception, we've got eyes, and those eyes register specific colors of frequencies. I believe those are electromagnetic frequencies that our eyes register. And if I'm not mistaken, our eyes actually only register 3 colors. And the rest of the spectrum, though they're scientifically there, the rest of the spectrum is interpolated in the brain. So we've got this neocortex that is interpreting so much information. Audio is a stimulation, instead of electromagnetic vibration or electromagnetic frequency, we have a frequency of an audio vibration, a vibration through the airwaves. Mm-hmm. And that being picked up by the ear, that the ear is such a sensitive instrument. And to all you kids out there that blast music, just remember that. Your ear is a very sensitive instrument, and you got to take care of it. And especially around crazy drummers like Ish, wear your earplugs. Now, so when we talk about expression of sound from a baby's cry, mm-hmm. which is, I don't think any parent has called that music, but a baby's cry definitely stimulates a certain biological response internally to any parent, especially the parent that hears the cry of their own child. You have these smell stimulants, visual stimulants, as I said. Your body is a nerve ending in this reality, in this sort of physical reality. And the way I look at it, and this isn't necessarily provable, but I look at mind as something different than brain. I like to separate those two.
Okay.
I look at the brain as the antenna, mm-hmm. and I look at mind as more of the software. So your brain has all these electrical impulses. You hear music, it's translated through that ear. I mean, we very much, when you talk about analog digital converters and such things in our own technology, we model them after the ear. As some people may know, the very first recording devices, the very first cylinder records took vibration, and the vibration would move a needle, and that needle would etch into the whatever they use, I think a wax-based substance.
Yeah.
And then you could play that back. So the ear is very sensitive. It's picking up all these frequencies and vibrations and translating it into the brain. And so when we're thinking about sound in that manner, mm-hmm. all the frequency manipulations end up just like words, translating information. So when does this information become music? Well, I think for me personally, I would define music as not necessarily just a textural sound, but something that has a phrase or an expression.
Right.
And perhaps maybe just a pad is a phrase or expression, but to me it's like, just sort of a soundscape that doesn't evolve much, that just mm-hmm. kind of hangs there. To me, is more of like, like a darkened room ready for the actors to come out, or it's like it sets a mood or a tone, and that in and of itself is a necessary building block, as painters will tell you if they're painting something you have a background and a foreground.
Yeah,
but the music, I believe personally, I feel as to be an expression. Mm-hmm. And so then if we talk about tonality, we start to get into the realm of personal experience. Some people grow up listening to Western music. Some people grow up listening to, more Middle Eastern, where you have quarter tones and...
like the different scales?
Yeah, different tuning structures. And there's also the idea of, in Western music, and if anybody that hasn't checked this out, you should check this out. There's the 440 war.
Oh yeah, what the tuning you mean?
Yeah, what A should be. What the note
440 kilohertz, that is, right?
Right. So that is an arbitrary frequency assigned to an arbitrary word symbol called A, just to give us a tonal center, and that can be tuned to anything.
Yeah.
And so you've really all of a sudden when it comes to music, just like language, you have to have a structure. You have to have some kind of a set of parameters that allows you to build expressions. To kind of touch back on something we talked about earlier in the podcast, for me, the most important part of music is pushing the boundaries. I mean, I love music that's familiar, especially if I know, hey, you like rock and roll. Well, check out this rock song. The beat's familiar. The instrumentation's familiar. Oh, there's a guitar, there's a bass, there's a singer. The structure might even be familiar.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people experience this. They're listening to a song they've never heard, and just from listening to it, they know when something's going to change.
Yeah.
Because there's this very specific pattern that a lot of people have sort of mimicked. And that's great. I mean, that, I'm not putting that down at all, because that sort of form is necessary. It's like sentences and building blocks. But I love when it gets out there and people experience an expression that you made that they have no contextual center for. Mm-hmm. To me, that's when sound becomes music, and music as a language turns into something spiritual.
Right.
It's like inventing new words for concepts you don't know yet.
Yeah.
Or you haven't experienced yet. And you can actually see this between languages. There's, symbols in certain Eastern languages that represent a large sentence in English. Or there's words, I know, like my mom is Greek, and every now and then she'll come out with a word, and I ask her, what does that word mean? And she says, well, there's not really a perfect English translation.
Right.
And you hear that a lot. Even between languages, it can be very difficult. So when you start introducing tonality and frequencies, you're stimulating parts of the brain. It is a thought. It is a process that for most people, not for most people, I think for everybody, mm-hmm. that they have to start building new mental pathways to understand. And I don't think everybody explores it completely. And that's cool. I mean, like, there's a lot of people that don't explore a lot of visual arts that, mm-hmm. Hey, have you ever seen an oil painting? Maybe not. Maybe they've never gone to a museum and looked at an oil painting up close. And silence, that's a great thing to integrate into this, because it kind of reminds me of cold versus hot or dark versus light.
Right.
And I'd remind that there's no such thing as absolute zero, because it would mean nothing would be able to exist. Darkness isn't something of it in itself. It's just a contrast of light. Darkness is a lack of light. So, when I think of silence, well, it's a lack of vibration, obviously, if you want to talk about it technically. And so when you have that silence, you are kind of back to that isolation. I think of silence as a reflection inward. Mm-hmm. Music can be a reflection inward, but silence really pushes you inward.
Yeah.
And I think I think my first big experience with silence, and maybe you've had one too, like this, where you're in an ISO booth about to do a record session.
All right.
And maybe you're a little nervous and you're in an ISO booth.
Yeah. And everything is just magnified crazy.
Yeah, they're like, hey, okay, we're just a few more minutes, and then we'll start
and you're
recording.
like, oh my God.
And then like the thing switches off, your headphones switch off, whatever, and you're sitting there, the little egg, soundproofing.
Yeah.
Just sitting there, and your thoughts are just bouncing off your head.
And you're getting more nervous with every second.
You can hear your heart beating,
and
and it's like a very inward experience.
Yeah. Talking about ISO booths, have you ever gone in an isolation tank?
No.
You have to do it. It's the best. It's so cool. Talk about merging with cosmic consciousness, but that also is another topic for another podcast.
do in the ISO booth, do you listen to anything, or do you just
do
it?
The isolation tank?
Oh, yeah.
You can, but I mean, you can have light on, you can have music on, but the way I prefer to do it when I do it is complete darkness. You've got earplugs in. I don't have any music on, And as soon as you close the booth and switch off the light, basically you feel like you're in space and you can't see a single thing. And then when you lie back into the water and you start floating, because it's the water is body temperature, after a few minutes, if you don't move, you end up not feeling the water and you're basically floating as if you would if you were in space. So what ends up happening is you start disassociating from your body, I'd say after maybe 20 minutes. Like I'll usually do 60 to 90 minutes.
Whoa.
In the isolation tank. So, it really takes a while in order for your body to process this extremely rare state that you have on this planet, because you feel like there's no gravity, there's no input signal whatsoever. And the most you will hear is your breath and your heartbeat, and that's it. And even that after a while will disappear, because you, like I said, your mind literally starts disassociating from your body, and it's very liberating. But also, I wouldn't recommend it for everyone, because it's quite scary too to start with. It's very psychedelic.
That sounds intense.
Yeah, but you should do it.
It sounds super intense. I've a couple of people have told me to try it. One person I know said that they know a bunch of artists at Pixar.
Oh yeah?
They're all about the isolation.
Oh man. Anytime I have the opportunity to do it, there's one that's like 2.5 hours drive from my house. There's nothing close by, but anytime I can, I will do it immediately. It's a practice in relaxation, really, because when you get in there, you want to start doing stuff, but there's nothing to do. So there's this internal tension, you know what I'm saying, that you have to sort of overcome to really completely relax. And it's a type of relaxation that you will never have outside of an isolation tank. What literally starts happening every time I've been in the isolation tank so far is, because there's complete silence, all of a sudden, maybe like after 30 minutes or 40 minutes, I'll start hearing these really loud cracking noises in my skull, because my body is so relaxed that, certain tensions that I have chronically in my body start relaxing. And then all of a sudden there'll be shifts in my skeleton. You know what I mean? So that's the type of relaxation you end up having if you can let go that much. If you do it for like 60 or 90 minutes, which is a very long time considering the state that you're in, when you come out, you feel so refreshed, as if you've had like a week holiday or something. It's really cool.
What's so interesting about that is, to touch back on what we were talking about in terms of external stimuli, by cutting all that external stimuli out, you literally are face to face with the internal, right?
Yeah.
And it seems to be like, from what you're describing, I think people in general, they get the most simple version of this is sleep.
Right.
People surrender their consciousness every night.
Yes.
And then they wake up the next morning. That's a leap of faith right there.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to say that to like freak people out about going to bed, but you think about it, it's like you surrender your consciousness.
Yeah.
It's like this like shut down and inward thing, but it sounds like with the isolation tank, it's really in your face.
Yeah, because you're conscious. Like when you go to sleep, the big difference is you slip into like the sleep dream state. Whereas when you're in the isolation tank, it's almost more like a meditative state, where the way I kind of describe it is, if you shake a snow globe, that's kind of the way we are in normal everyday consciousness, right? There's just like constant shaking of a snow globe, and all of the snow particles are our thoughts. And when you go into something like an isolation tank, it's literally like a slow motion version of stopping to shake the snow globe, and for 20 minutes, all of a sudden, all of those particles of snow, which are your thoughts, start just going down, and all of a sudden there's like this clear space that you're in, but you're completely conscious of it. Whereas when you're in a dream state, you're dreaming, there's activity going on. If you get to relax to the point that I'm talking about in the isolation tank, you're completely aware of your surroundings at all given moments. There's just no thought, and there's just complete space, because you don't even feel your body as a limitation anymore. So it's almost like you just feel this infinite space.
That's so
which relates back
intense.
to silence. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so it's like a reset.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what's paradoxical it's almost paradoxical, this idea of when you're isolated to that degree, you become like one with everything.
Yeah, it's so true.
So it's a weird sort of. I've always thought this to be an interesting idea that, you know, the Buddhist meditation and this concept of nirvana and reaching the state of enlightenment to a point of just becoming pure energy. You're actually in isolation, but that isolation is allowing you to reach out. So it's this weird, I think it's this very...
It's almost like two sides of the same coin, really.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if you reach that point of complete isolation, it's almost like you're completely connected to everything at that point.
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, that says a lot to silence in terms of the value of silence.
Yeah. I mean, I always see silence as like pure potentiality at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's a blank canvas.
Yeah, especially when it comes to like music, because like I said, without the silence, there would be no canvas to paint the music on, you know?
I mean, I'm sure when, you know, a visual artist, like a painter, for instance, looks at a blank canvas, just images start flashing through their head. Whereas most people that aren't painters, that aren't thinking in those terms, might look at a blank canvas and think, oh, I wonder what someone's going to paint. And both of those personalities in reality are necessary, which kind of brings up another topic of your audience. And when I say audience, I don't even mean that from a perspective of being a successful business recording artist or something.
Right.
Where you have, you know, this big following. And when I say audience, I just mean anybody that consumes your art, anybody that looks at it, anybody that listens to it.
Yeah.
Any person out there, even if it's just your friend and you did something and they're the only other person that ever hears it, you've shared something with them. The entire intention behind sharing something actually gives it life.
Right.
I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of the right word, but it's like it animates it. It gives it a purpose.
Yeah.
And even, I think, you know, there are artists out there, and I'm one of them, and I've met other people that have done art for themselves. And it sounds kind of a selfish thing to say that, like, oh, I did this for myself. But what you're doing is you're doing something that maybe you're just like if you were to talk to yourself, that nobody else would understand, or you're not trying to tell somebody something, you're just trying to figure something out for yourself.
Yeah, I think when it comes to that type of thing, it's not the end product of the piece of art that's important. In that case, it's the process of making the art, the transformation that you have to go through in yourself to create that art.
Exactly. There's a self-discovery to it.
Yeah. And an evolution of your own neurology at the end of the day to work your way through, you know, getting an idea from like a deep spiritual space possibly all the way out into this reality. Something has to happen, you know, even just biologically and neurologically to create that.
Yeah. You know, I guess this also speaks back to the idea of doing music as a business. When you do something for yourself, where you go through an introspective transformation, you're not doing it for somebody else, and you're not necessarily cutting corners or not cutting corners is the wrong phrase to use.
Even just limiting yourself.
You're not limiting. Yeah, you're not limiting yourself. You're not limiting your expressions. And so by doing it for yourself, you're always going to push the envelope.
Yeah.
I think, you know, or even if you're not quote unquote pushing the envelope, you're doing something to pull a new perspective out of yourself, a new skill or a new idea, or even it could be like a really huge transformation where you realize, oh, I'm going to do a totally different project now that was nothing that I thought of before. Whatever it is definitely beneficial, I think. It always has value. And I think a lot of that process of self-discovery comes from the creation. So even when you're creating something for an audience, you're going through an incredible self-discovery process.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, every now and then to do something just for yourself, it's a way to challenge yourself first off, but it's also, I think, a great way to discover yourself.
Yeah, totally. And what it is you like and what it is you don't like, what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you need to work on.
Yeah. Any person that I've ever spoken to that is an athlete, for instance, will tell you, you know, the person I'm trying to beat is myself. When I run a marathon, I want to beat my time.
Yeah, my own personal best.
Yeah, my own personal best. Again, I guess it's the same side of the coin, or what was the phrase you used?
Two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, yeah. This inner and outward reflection of art, of musical expression. I'm not even sure if we've answered the question that.
Yeah,
I take your entire podcast series to answer, but
I don't think it's a question that can be answered. To be honest with you, I think it's everyone has their own subjective view on what music is and how it relates to sound and silence, but it's just like a very small fraction of the total reality of it. You know what I mean?
And this is a good compliment to drummers out there too, that all music is really rhythm. When you take a drum and beat it at 440 cycles per second, you get A above middle C, right?
That's something I think about often because it all has to do with our perception of sound. You know, like you're saying, it's basically 440 literally beats per second, right? Is A.
I think, yeah.
Or no, it's not 440, it's 440,000, right? It's kilohertz, right?
Yes, yep.
But it is a rhythm. And it's, I guess, our the resolution of how we hear rhythm that then ends up going into sound, right? So there must be other beings or entities in this universe who have a much higher resolution of hearing, for lack of a better word, which means what we might perceive as music, they will hear completely differently, right?
Yeah, that is. Well, oh gosh, this gets into a really intense sort of environmental stimuli.
Right.
What about our evolution on this planet in context of the biology around us? You know, what about all of that developed, you know, the ear developed sensory perception of how we experience vibration, and even culturally speaking, artwork and how art has developed to be part of culture and part of society, as opposed to something totally alien, that a different sort of set of parameters, right?
Right, yeah.
However, there is global, I don't mean to sound like a total geek here, but there are global parameters of our physical universe. Not to go on tangent here, but you know, you talk about alien life form, for instance.
Yeah.
If you were to find some sort of biological alien life on a different planet, it would still be within the realm of the universal parameters of electrons and protons and
right, the material universe, I guess.
Material molecular structures, but how their brains are structured, what their perception is, what frequencies they see and or hear. We can even see that in our own our own planet. You look at a bat. Like what they interpret or see, sharks.
Or even dogs, you know, how they hear.
It's amazing. I mean, you know, elephants hear 10 hertz below us, which is why they can...
Oh, they hear like nature sounds and stuff?
Oh, yeah, like earthquakes coming or something's rumbling. They hear it before anybody else. You know, we hear 20 hertz down to 20 hertz. They hear down to 10 hertz. Sharks have a sense of magnetism. I don't know if it's all sharks. I think it's one. Maybe it might be one specific shark or multiple sharks that understand which way is due north.
Right.
They have a perspective of magnetism in their sensory. Like, I mean, I can't, you know, I'm not a human compass, but certainly that could be a biological trait. So it's really interesting when you think of context and I think of parameters in general of what we have to work with. I mean, this goes back to the music making and notes, and like a piano, for instance, a piano does have a finite number of keys, which means even though astronomical in combination, there's a finite number of combinations,
and it's a very specific scale, right?
Yeah, and a very specific sound, too. So you know, a grand piano is going to sound exactly how it sounds in the room it's in. Everything about sound and when it becomes music and its relationship to silence and relationship to space. We haven't really talked about time.
Right. That's actually a good point.
Time as a dimension, because music is very much dependent on a development. Just like language, just like a sentence.
Well, there would be no music without time.
Right. Yeah. That's very
It's just
true.
impossible. Like I always actually thought of time as the canvas that musicians paint on, because it always happens in sequence, regardless of what you're doing. Otherwise, it would just be one super dense sound. You know what I mean?
Right. It's like when your the cursor in your DAW is at one spot and you're just playing on a keyboard and you do like a retrospective record, all the notes are happening in one spot. It's just like a giant block chord of just mud. But spread that out over time and where things lay. I had this thought a while back that when you're looking at a DAW and you're looking at a composition that you've written, you're looking at it outside time, because you're looking at the whole arrangement. When you hit play, that cursor starts to move from left to right, and it starts at measure 1 and starts to move through your musical phrases. And if you're looking at the DAW, if you're looking at a Logic or Pro Tools or even live, arrangement, and you're looking at the way you've arranged everything, you know what's coming up before it happens. Yeah. It's like an eternity viewpoint. I have a feeling that's what eternity must look like. Right. You're like looking at a sequence of events and you know how they're going to unfold before they unfold. Totally. The cursor is what people are experiencing.
I guess that's the present moment, really.
It is. It's the moment. Yeah, it's the present. This is another thing that's kind of infiltrated the internet, even for non-musical users. You post something to SoundCloud, they give this really dramatically abstract, rough description of your waveform. Yeah. But you can see where there's like peaks and valleys. Yeah. And you already know kind of the shape of the song before you hit play.
So true. Listen, Mike, man, we could go on forever like we have been for the past 17 years. But would you come back on the podcast so we can talk some more?
I would absolutely love to.
That's so cool. Well, listen, man, how can people find you online and connect with you?
Well, I have a website. I'm going to be updating it pretty soon. Yeah. But it's my full name, Michael DiMattia.
Could you maybe just spell that quickly?
Yeah, sure. So traditional spelling of Michael, Michael, DiMattia, which is my last name, DiMattia.com.
Great.
And on my website, you can find, a biography, some credits, and various music projects I've worked on.
Are there audio files on there too, so people can hear some of your stuff?
There's audio files, and not all of it is my composition. Some of it, there's descriptions of what's what. Some of it are other people's music that I've worked on. I kind of put the website, honestly, I put the website together as a resume more than an interactive thing, but I that's why I want to update it. I want to make it more for people to just go and listen to some cool music.
Well, maybe by the time this podcast comes out, you can have some stuff up for people to listen to.
There you go. Yeah, no, there's plenty to listen to for sure. But Ish, thank you for having me on, man.
I really mean it. Please come back on very soon so we can continue this really inspiring conversation.
Yeah, this has absolutely been wonderful. It's my first podcast. So
remember to invite me on your podcast when you start yours.
I definitely can't wait. We'll be covering many of the same topics, I'm sure. But as you said, there's so much to talk about.
An infinity.
An infinity.
All right, man. You take care.
Okay.
All the best.
Take care.
What a great guy. I love Mike DiMattia so much. Anyway, thank you again for listening. Make sure to check out Mike's stuff online. Also, make sure to go to musicsoundsandsilence.com for the show notes of this episode. And I will be back in a couple of weeks with my next guest, filmmaker Jonathan Rock, who has worked with amazing artists such as Nine Inch Nails, Jane's Addiction, and Guns N' Roses, to name a few. That conversation is also extremely insightful, and I can't wait to share it with you all. So make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes so you get it as soon as it comes out, and I shall see you all again in a couple of weeks. Take care. Peace.